Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Connie Chijara and I'll be chairing today's webinar. I have the privilege of introducing our two speakers today from MineRP, Empie Strydom and Mike Woodhall. They will be speaking on a very interesting topic about introducing software to the mining business, particularly what's changed in 20 plus years and what hasn't. And just to give you a brief bio on them, starting with Mike Woodhall, who is the Director of Mining Standards at MineRP. Mike has extensive mining knowledge and experience, which is put to use in the construction of robust industry information management models in public forums, as well as for internal MineRP purposes. He has serviced MineRP clients in IT implementation and consulted broadly in support of IT initiatives in the mineral resource environment. Mine planning has always been a passion for Mike, while keeping pace with the IT tools of the day and now working in a world of 3D graphics, helping miners and IT personnel alike to understand and visualize the realities of mining. As a fellow of the SAIMM, he continued to contribute to the organization of and participation in local and international mining conferences. And our other speaker, Empie Strydom, who is the Vice President of Marketing at MineRP. Since he joined GMSI in 2001, he has filled various positions, including lead software developer for risk management solutions, project manager for implementations, business development manager, overseeing both sales and marketing, and lately, a focused international marketing role. Empie works closely with MineRP's ecosystem partners and MineRP's VP for partner relationships and is responsible for coordinating strategy around joint go-to-market strategy activities with the partner ecosystem. Please enjoy the webinar and remember to post any of your questions in the Q&A section and they will be answered after the presentation.
Mike, if you're ready, you can proceed.
There you go. I'm unmuted and I'm on video. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can, Mark.
Clearly, yes.
Okay, thank you. So good afternoon. Empie and I have a bit of a story to tell today. It goes back over more than 20 years. And it's interesting to reflect on some of the things that have improved and some of the issues that we still have to deal with today. There we go. Okay, so Empie and I both work for MineRP. We have, as MineRP, the company has been around since 97, sorry. And it came out of the Anglo Gold Anglo-American Gold and Uranium Division, as it was. Then became Anglo Gold, and since Anglo Gold has now sold off its last property in South Africa, things do happen over time. But from those beginnings, we have grown into a global company, and we focus on a 3D world of mining information, bringing all those data sets together so that we can unlock measurable value, and we fully engaged in digital enterprises. It is a transformational exercise. It's not something you do alone. And you'll see from some of the examples we give today, just how complex the story can become. Okay, I'm having trouble changing the slides.
I'll do that, Mike. That's fine.
Thank you. There you go, next one. Okay, so a little bit about MineRP. We've been around since '97, gone through a few iterations to be where we are. But what we have done along the way in terms of talking to mining clients is come to understand exactly where their problems lie and which are the things that miners are interested in doing something about. And when we talk about information management, then the first issue that comes up, well, how long does it take me to find out what's going on so that I can take a different decision? And that answer to that question might vary from 1,000 times a second to once a month. All the mining companies we speak to have the same issue when it comes to planning, is to get the entire enterprise onto one plan. We have two major domains, the mining technical domain and the financial domain, and they come from two completely different views of the business, and very rarely do they actually talk to each other. When we get around then to deciding what it is we need to do and putting together mine schedules, at various levels of detail, the very next question is, well, how do I optimize that schedule? How do I make sure that everybody's doing what he should? I'm not duplicating, I'm not missing, and I'm keeping everybody and all the bits of equipment occupied in their proper role. And then when we get into that execution mode, the exercise of short interval control, the term itself has been around for decades, but the intervals are getting shorter and shorter. With the introduction of technology that enables us to be far more aware of what's happening in the workplace while it happens, we're in a position, A, to drown in the data that's coming our way, or B, to actually be taking decisions much faster. Next one. Next slide. Okay. Right, so we've got our little story today. There is an African proverb there. If you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And we put that up as a reminder that this is not an exercise that any one company will undertake by itself or with any one partner. It requires a great collective to make digital transformation happen. The next comment about slow is smooth and smooth is fast, I believe, comes from the American military, but it's for people like me who are naturally impatient. So we have a story to tell. We're going to start with a strategic decision, excuse me, in a mining company, and examine its implications in the area of mineral resource management all the way down to the operational level. And over that same period of time, we'll be looking at what has changed from the IT perspective and how it impacts everybody from the operations right to the strategic decisions you take at head office. So it's two journeys, a people journey and an information management journey. Okay, so firstly, mineral resource management. This was a new term in South African mining back in the late 90s. But AngloGold Ashanti took a strategic decision, along with the decision to move international, that they would put together the mineral resource management environment from all of the individual mine technical disciplines that most of you will be familiar with. So particularly geology, survey, ventilation, rock engineering, mine design, so on. In other parts of the world, it might be called a technical services division. But in this environment, focusing on the ore body, we gave it the name of mineral resource management, and it's become well embedded in the way South African minings operate. But part of that decision was that mine planning would be then done with desktop computing. There were mainframes. Most of the mining houses at the time had mainframes in head office. And one of the decisions in terms of moving to desktop was that we would come off the mainframe and to do it as quickly as it seemed practical to do so. Well, that practicality turned out to take nearly 20 years because it only happened in 2017. So we had these new departments. Well, who was going to run them? And there were two main contenders. There was the geologist, who had the advantage of some tertiary education and very direct and valuable insights into the ore body. And we had the surveyor. In this part of the world, he's the custodian of large amounts of data, and they had management skills because of running survey and sampling departments for many years. Okay, next. Next slide. Yep. So what is it that they were going to be in charge of? Well, if you're going to introduce new technology, you are going to change business processes. And so we defined several of those, particularly in the planning area. And you have a whole bunch of new roles and a lot of peoples and a lot of egos to be dealt with in terms of who is going to fulfill what role. In the meantime, IT of the day was trying to keep pace. Remember, the legacy was a mainframe. Now all of a sudden we're talking about hardwire and fiber and radio, sometimes all three at the same time on one mine. And there was an episode where the connection through from Johannesburg to Velcom was just choked solid. The emails weren't getting through because it was just too slow. So they doubled the bandwidth, and a week later it's full again. And even today, to some extent, you'll find that IT departments are still trying to keep up with what is possible and what people are trying to achieve. Next one. Right, so this slide now is a composite picture of what happened in a 12-month period, where we're implementing mineral resource management and all these new IT tools into several mines at the same time. Okay. The new tools bring with it new skills and some new roles and responsibilities. If we look at introducing new tools and requiring people to have new skills, we call that systems development. And so we were engaged in putting together work groups for people who were using the same tools, trying to deal with the same problems and just sharing some experiences, talking particularly about enhancements to functionality at the time, and collecting ideas for new developments. We're trying to implement software along with what we called functional training in the day, as opposed to formal training. Formal training, you take someone out of their job, put them in a classroom, inject them with some knowledge and then take them back. But once you get back to the workplace where they're trying to come to grips with what a new piece of software can do, you need someone to hold your hand. And so we termed that functional training. And as I tell this story, you will recognize some things that are still valid today, many of them, in fact. So if you introduce new skills and you want people to take up new roles and responsibilities, then you're into the world of people development. And one of the, besides examining various competencies of the people who were available, we had to look at new job descriptions. Now, at the time, the mine planner's job description being used in the mid-90s had been written in the 1960s. And other technical officials were in the same kind of boat. We actually didn't have anyone in the HR department who knew how to write job descriptions, and we brought back somebody out of retirement to do that. And we ran various assessments and put up plans for people and various training programs as a consequence of all those findings. So when we talk about the link between the tools and the roles, then we're into what we used to call back then organization development. Today you'll hear the term change management or adoption management. It's the soft, fluffy stuff that particularly back then operational people had trouble coming to grips with. But we actually train people. How do you hold a meeting? How do you build a team from a bunch of people that you may or may not know them? You work on the same mine, and now all of a sudden you're in the same department. How do you pull all that together? And particularly where you have someone who has been promoted to the mineral resource manager position, whose colleagues now have to report to him. There were a lot of hurdles to overcome at an individual level. The term restructuring, that's just the way you're going to change the organization around, and dealing with all the process maps that were coming along. All those changes you were making to the processes, we were making visible and continue to do so today. And of course, it's all people stuff. So relationships between people, within the department, or between the MRM and the operational people, all became things we had to deal with. And the only reason we could be comfortable that what we were doing was the right thing to do was because, by and large, most of the people involved came out of the mining industry, and we were well focused on what the business needed to achieve. Next slide. Okay, so some of the things that haven't changed, and they're largely people things. You hear the term resistance to change, but it does cover quite a spectrum. We had two mine planners, both in their 50s, within a couple of years of retirement. And the one said, if you leave me alone, I'll slip away quietly. The other guy said, I'm about to retire, I want to leave a legacy. And we literally had to deal with that spectrum. You'll see the little red asterisk there when it comes to resistance to change. That was the first time I lost it with a client. Unfortunately, we chose to go at each other in public, but a senior geologist was actually impeding any progress of the junior geologists in taking up the new IT tools. So all of this change management stuff is people work, it's hard work, and it's very necessary. There is a period of time of 18 months, which seems to crop up time and again. I think it's a reflection on the size of the organization, but appears also to have something to do with the human endeavor to do things themselves. And so you'll have someone tell me, don't tell me how to do my job. And 18 months later, we have a different conversation. And I can absolutely guarantee you, I've seen this many times over the years, if someone says to you, don't worry about all that change management stuff, we'll do it ourselves, you will have the same conversation again. No client I've ever seen has managed the change management by themselves. So here's a few things that happened along the way. Back in my own career as a mine overseer at the time, I had a section manager who actually thought he was going to lose his job. He felt threatened by the head office mainframe computer. And I remember at the time being quite astounded by it. In 2003, in another completely different organization, we were doing some audits on how well things were being adopted. And the chief ventilation officer, also well in his 50s, his desk was completely clear and clean. He had no technology of any kind. And he admitted that he leaves all the computer stuff to the youngsters. Even earlier in my career as a shift boss, we used to color in the monthly plans. It was a 3-month plan for the workplaces, and each month had a different color, and it was annotated in various ways with bits of information. So in 2003, in that same audit, we found that shift bosses were still coloring in their plans, even though the mine itself was well equipped with IT and all the tools they need to do things digitally. And that was the second time I lost it. Back in 1980, a mine manager wanted us to manipulate information. We'd spent a long time as mine overseers getting the miners to report their drill holes accurately. Unfortunately, it meant that the monthly report that went through to head office showed up the mine manager as having the lowest holes per machine shift. So he came back and told us exactly what he wanted. And despite all the arguments, we gave him more holes per machine shift. In 2001, I had a mine manager ask for some functionality in the new piece of software installed, that he wanted to change the month end date after the month had started, so that he could control the month production figures that went through to head office. So the point being, a lot of this depends on how things are managed. But a lot of things have changed. We don't use pencil and paper so much anymore. In fact, it's very rare to find it. Even the CAD tools of today are being overtaken by newer tools, and software continues to develop. We've gone largely from a physical world into a digital world, and people are far more comfortable in the terminology associated with that. We've gone from only a few people understanding what was going on to actually having many, many people involved in this, using the digital tools. We've grown up through the spectrum from data, through information and knowledge, and through to insight, because you can put information in front of more people. And the resistance to change is actually taking on a different tone altogether, where things are becoming inevitable. There's a couple other things that have changed. We don't see dual screen workstations being called two screen goodies anymore, or a 14-inch screen balanced on telephone books to line up with a 17-inch screen. And here's my favorite new millennial. It's not just a game for youngsters. There are older people who have kept pace with the technological change. And here's an example. That's a production manager who holds his meeting with a big screen every day, no paper involved. When you put this kind of information in front of people on a big screen, because miners carry around in their head a picture of their operation, when you overlay other information, it jumps out of the screen at them. So we had the example with a bunch of general managers in front of a screen showing the lost blast information against a backdrop of the survey. And immediately, one of the GMs spotted there in the bottom right-hand corner, he said, that panel down there has got a ventilation problem. So the dramatic impact of making things visible, we've seen repeated time and time again. Another very interesting one, which something which cannot be done with a pencil and paper, can only be done by having all your data sets in one database. There was a raise on this particular mine at depth. The miner was happy, the geologist was happy, the rock engineer was happy, the safety officer was happy. They'd all signed off on this particular raise. And then a large chunk of hanging wall fell out and landed on the drilling crew. So what had happened up there in the hanging wall, just beyond the reach of the roof bolts, was a low angled fault. Because it was at depth, the stress fractures around the excavation intersected that fault and effectively made a big wedge, and it dropped out. So while we were trying to think how we're going to model these things in 3D, one of our guys who lives in the world of data pointed out that in fact, you just have to ask the database, what is the distance between the raise and the low angled fault? And you may have picked up that fault a couple of 100 meters away, but the geologist is able to project that position of that fault. You know where it is in 3D space. You know where your excavation is. You know where your planned excavation is. And so you can forewarn at planning time the guys involved of the fact that they're getting closer and closer to a potentially dangerous situation, and you get to do something about it before you get there. The kinds of discussions we have around software enhancements has improved considerably. We're not arguing about color and thickness anymore. We're talking about things that add value to the business. Another thing we've been engaged in since 2003 is lecturing on information management in the mineral resource management environment through the WITS Mining School. And we have youngsters coming through. They're the kids of the people we used to work with. So there's a lot of continuity is having an impact. And when it comes to things that have changed, my all-time favorite is that we no longer put servers on the same circuit as the fluorescent light tubes in the survey office. If you do, every time the lights flicker, the servers crash, your files get corrupted, and you phone your software provider and tell them it doesn't work. Okay, Empie is going to take over now and take you on the information management IT journey that covers that same period.
Thank you, Mike. It's interesting that if you listen to Mike's stories, then on the one hand, one feels that very little has changed. The problems are fairly similar. The kinds of resistance to change have hardly changed a lot. And yet, if you a bit of interesting research that was recently done shows the time that it took for well, I guess nowadays pervasive technologies like the telephone and the automobile and etc. to reach 50 million users has come down by an incredible amount. 75 years that it took for a telephone to reach 50 million users, 62 years for cars and 46 years for electricity, and then it starts accelerating, 28 years for credit cards, 22 years for television. See that the entertainment helps. ATMs, 18 years. Computers, only 14 years, but still 14 years. Mobile phones, 12 years. I seem to recall that went quicker, but anyways. The internet, 7 years. And then let's see what happens. Facebook, 4 years. WeChat, 1 year. Pokemon Go, which is a game, 19 days. And then if you look at viral videos, you've got millions of people exposed to a piece of content within a matter of hours, depending on who's posting, of course. So all of a sudden, we're faced with a situation that people respond to the availability of information inside of a business, and unless we manage that information well and we make sure that we turn it into appropriate insight, etc., then we are going to have different measures of response across the business and different levels of response, and that's just going to create chaos. So I want to talk to you this afternoon quickly about 3 digital chasms that I believe all mining companies have to overcome in order to create a digitally connected mining enterprise that is actually able to make use of the advances in technology that we've seen over the past 20 years. So I'm going to talk about 3 chasms: the discipline chasm, the enterprise chasm, and the automation chasm. And if I start off with the discipline chasm, it kind of starts where Mike just ended, that over the past 20 years, there's been a proliferation of people who have created software to solve specific problems. You've got drill hole management systems and block modeling systems and rock mechanics systems and mine planning and scheduling systems and so on and so on. And all of those people with their individual tools that you see there generate a heck of a lot of data, and they're all dependent on each other for the data that gets created. The problem is that when they use the disconnected systems, you've got this situation that you end up with hugely fragmented data sets. I kind of half-jokingly say engineers create software problems to solve mining problems, which is obviously a bit of an issue. Then we asked ourselves, so what is the appropriate response to this situation? And the appropriate response indeed is to create order between all of these systems. Now, the only way that we've seen that mines have been able to successfully create order is to create some kind of, or obtain some kind of a platform that externalizes the, let's call it the IT stuff from the mining stuff, so that the mining people can keep on using the mining technical systems that they wish to use, because those systems are at least arguably optimized for their use. And the IT people worry about things like, you know, the right master data, those things that you see in drop-down lists, or when you want to select a workplace name or a piece of equipment that you want to order, workflow and security and license management and storage and reporting, etc., etc. All of those ITE stuff, we can drop down and should be dropping down into a platform layer that takes care of that. Because platforms create order from chaos. They provide one version of the truth. So if you have centralized information management, then you can have centralized timing of the provisioning of that information to everybody. And you can have centralized orchestration of the workflow that goes around that, etc., etc. So they provide one version of the truth and allow for the integration of systems and information across these different discipline silos. So in order to cross that discipline chasm, we have to move out of a world where every engineer buys a system that works for them without any kind of consideration of the way that the information is consumed downstream and upstream. And that's what a platform takes care of. You hear me use the term platform a lot today, and I'm going to explain a little bit more later on. The second chasm that we believe needs to be overcome is what we call the enterprise chasm. And the enterprise chasm is really where you've got these two groups of people on the mine, you know, the miners and the business people, or the bean counters very often, where the miners are really responsible to care for tons and grade and the location of the holes and the size and shape of the holes, etc., that gets made in your body. Whereas the business people care about the product. Is it the right quality, and do I have enough of it at the right time, and can I sell it into the market? At an enterprise level, say you're working for a mining group, their integrated mine planning is all about creating a strategy for resource to reserve conversion and final conversion into product. And on the business side, of course, it's all about creating a financial plan that looks after availability of capital to do the development that needs to be done, and operational expenditure for the actual stoping, etc., and the buying of materials and the paying of people and all of that. Moving down to an actual mine level, it's all about production scheduling and control on the science of mining side, and on the business of mining side, it's about logistics and support scheduling. So you want to make a hole in the ground in kilometers down, you better have fresh air there and electricity and water and etc., etc. All of the things that you need to do the work that was planned in the mine plan. Of course, then I go into the actual workplace level, and there it's about executing the work that was planned in the schedule and orchestrating all of the various resources that are doing the work so that they don't run into each other all the time, and tracking where things and people are, and monitoring the progress of the work and the status of the assets and the status of the workplace, etc. On the business of mining side, again, it's about resourcing, so making sure that the right people are in the right place at the right time, and I've got the right equipment there, and moving things between workplaces and replenishing underground stores, etc., etc. So there's a whole logistics cycle that follows the miner everywhere they go, and the miner really does not want to be bothered about all of that. They just want the right stuff at the right time when they've got to do the work. They don't want to be sitting around waiting for it. And on the asset side, there is sensing and controlling. You know, the miner wants say, for example, a jumbo to be positioning itself and to make sure that it does the right drilling at the right time, in accordance with the drill pattern, for example, that was given to the machine. And the machine should be doing that as much as possible in an automated way. And if we're able to do all of that properly, then on the mining side, we call that short interval control. And on the business side, we call that financial control. But here is the problem, and Mike referred to that earlier. There is a huge disconnect between this technical side, or the science of mining, and the business of mining. And that's the chasm that we've got across. So we've got to get to a place where we are able to do one set of business planning, where every planned mining action is supported by the set of financial and logistical and other transactions in your SAP ERP system, or whatever it is that you use. And on the mining side, where if I schedule something, let's say I have a schedule that demands a certain amount of LHDs and a certain amount of jumbos and a certain amount of movable machines that's got to be in a workplace, then I want that to be maintained automatically. But I also want the maintenance schedule to not interfere with the production schedule. And I want the HR provisioning and rostering to make sure that I've got the right people at the right time in the right workplace. That demands an integration between your ERP system and your mine planning or your mining technical systems. In the workplace, I want an integration between my fleet management system and my ERP system to make sure that I've got the right amount of fuel in the right places and electricity installed and underground networks available if I wanted to do remote control of my, or even automation in modern mines. All of that is necessary. So overcoming this enterprise chasm, we really need mature platforms on both sides that provide for the integration and the orchestration of activities and resources across these enterprise domains. It's no good that mining software gets bought by the miner and business software gets bought by the CIO or the CFO. And it's some techies business to make the two talk to each other, but they don't. And we don't bring that requirement for integration into the choice of the software that we finally choose to implement in our mine. If we move along to the automation side, that is, of course, a whole new horizon that we talk to. And when you talk about automation, if you're honest with yourself, you probably thought about automating a machine. All right. How do we make that machine do its work without a driver in the cab? And most of us think that that is automation. But the fact is, automation is so much more than just that. It is about automating the entire mining process. It's about making sure, starting off on the left-hand side here, that I know continuously in high definition what kind of ore is available where and what mine plan I have to have so that I can safely get to that ore and that I have it available at the right time, depending on what the market is demanding. And also that when I plan maintenance in my enterprise asset maintenance systems, or I plan for HR take on, or I plan for a variety of other supporting activities and logistics move and procurements and replenishing, etc. All of that is aligned with my production plan. That'll give me the ability to then have what we refer to as a master business schedule. And the master business schedule contains the relationships and the detailed tasks and the relationships between them for handing over to things like fleet management systems that can then catch, match, and dispatch those tasks to individual resources and schedule the execution and track where the resources are and make sure that the things don't run into each other and that they operate smoothly. And if I know what the relationship between the various tasks and resources are, then I can tell an individual resource through appropriate communication capabilities and onboard control technologies to do the work. And I can make sure that they don't run into each other through obstacle detection and avoidance. And I can have operator clients on them if they still have humans in them to tell me continuously what the status of the production is. And of course, then there's the rise of Industry 4.0 type IoT networks that'll tell me what the status is of the asset, the machine, the production, so the work that the machine is doing, and the environment. Am I still working in a safe environment? Is it becoming too hot for the optimal performance of the machine, or if there are people down there for the people, etc., etc. And I've got to have that feedback loop back into planning for the longer term, but also into the daily in-shift operational cycle that goes on. So automating a vehicle without automating the process is of very little use, and mature platforms are supposed to take care of that as well. So what is it actually? I've used this term platform a lot now. My last slide is, what is it that we mean when we talk about mature platforms and about platforms to start off with? So I'm going to talk to you about what we call integration paradigms and appropriate integration paradigms, because there are many integration paradigms available. Firstly, the first decision that we believe every mine and any mine today that wants to modernize the operation needs to make is, what is the kind of decision latency that I can live with? Do I have in-shift problems that I need to solve? Or is my problems more the long-term kinds of problems that don't need me to be as responsive as otherwise? So if I can live with a long decision latency, it's going to imply that I can live with a certain kind of integration paradigms between all of these systems. But if I have to do things right in the shift, it needs much tighter integration. At the same time, there's enterprise readiness. How ready are my people? Have they been trained? Are my roles appropriately redefined? Have I got the future of work planned in here so that people are ready and trained to adopt these new fancy systems that I'm going to use? So if I've got a very small or immature enterprise, it's no good plugging in fancy systems that run from second to second and need a control room with highly skilled data scientists to work in the background. Maybe the operator and the planner sits right next to each other in one room, and they just talk on the same from the same spreadsheet or whiteboard on the wall. It's a different scenario. Whereas if I've got a highly mature, highly complex enterprise, I cannot live with the kinds of systems that would be appropriate for that kind of environment. So we've got five pillars here, or five integration paradigms that I want to run you by. And then if you were to plot your business on these two curves, you should see that that some appropriate paradigms emerge. Firstly, companies started off a few years ago with having disconnected systems, a geological management system designed by the geologist for the geologist, and a mine planning system designed by the mining engineer for the mining engineer, etc., etc. And there were all kinds of monitors and so on that started being implemented on MES systems and so on, SCADA systems that started even controlling things. But they were disconnected from each other. And if you have a low latency requirement, then it is kind of okay, but because in order to make a decision, you've got the time to ask the geologist for their opinion and to export you maybe some data and to create a report that the mining engineer can use and replan, etc., etc. It's a low latency, low complexity kind of business that can work with standalone mining technical systems. The moment that you go lower across that curve, you have to have companies or you have to have systems that are at least able to do rudimentary data exchange through things like file imports and exports. You know, give me a CXV file, give me a DXF file, give me an Excel file, and I'll import it from this into that and into an Access database, etc., etc. So companies started doing that. They started building these interfaces between various systems so that I can, at least in a rudimentary way, start exchanging or start to exchange data. But very quickly they learned that I might have 5 different geological systems if I've got 5 different mines, especially if they're on 5 different continents. And maintaining these interfaces, some research has shown us that could cost you up to 10 times as much as what you paid for the systems to start off with. So that's not going to be appropriate for a modern mining company that wants to be agile and responsive. Then mining technical systems vendors like MineRP and others said, okay, well, why don't we start building suites of applications? So, Mr. Mine, you can buy my geological management system and my planning system, and they know how to talk to each other. I've got a extract, transform, and load capability that sends data from a known system to a known system, and they exchange data much better. So suites of applications, and that sounds good. The problem is what they demand is that if you want to work in an optimal way, you've got to rip and replace the systems you've already invested in and trained people in and so on, in order to use the system that comes from your new vendor of choice. And 6 months down the line, your senior planner retires. Now your geo is the senior guy, and they prefer another suite. And you know, the story starts from the beginning. So the last two pillars are really where MineRP was maybe some 10 years ago and where we are today. We started realizing that you've got to start standardizing the way that information is managed in a platform, while still providing mines with the option to use planning and geological and survey and whatever other mining technical systems exist from whatever vendor they should choose. So there is the ability to use multiple vendor systems, but to then externalize. Remember what I said earlier when I said we want to bring the IT stuff into the IT domain, bring the data into properly well-managed data. And one area where I manage security, and one area where I manage workflow, and one area where I manage orchestration, etc., interaction with other systems. And this is an early integrated platform paradigm. But you see that exchanging data, for example, between the mine planning system and your budgeting system is still a matter of exporting from this tool to that tool. So the next and final environment here, before we can start looking at automating work, is to not exchange data anymore, but rather use what is called application programmable interfaces, or web services, or their variety of modern functional exchange mechanisms. So that now the planning system here could call a planning function on the ERP side. And the system doesn't actually do it. The platform has the capabilities to take care of that. Now, these two people, the accountant and the mining engineer, can work together, both of them doing their work, and whatever they change on the financial side changes on the technical side, or requires changes here, and vice versa, automatically, and it can even be done in an automated way. Now think of things like generating multiple scenarios for when you do what-if planning, or you want to do multiple mine planning options, and test the feasibility from a financial perspective, or the viability from a financial perspective. All of that can now be done because now you've got a system asking another system for its opinion on its current status, and vice versa. Before I change the plan, what is the status of the workplace? And because of the change in the status of the workplace, therefore change the logistical requirements, change who I send to work in the workplace. And because I cannot send people in the workplace, what is the impact on the plan? So in future mines that want to move from an analog planning and orchestration way of work to to possibly support automation, the only way really to go that is to have platforms that can call functions and talk to each other like humans do, and of course enter the world of artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc. at a later stage. That's kind of the story from our side. I hope we've given you an insight into some of the things that that used to be the case, and how on the one hand very little has changed, and then a glimpse into the future of what needs to be done if you need to support a mine of the future, and what kinds of systems, not what brands, but what kinds of systems would be appropriate as you move into the future. I think that's it from our side, but we may have some time for questions if there are.
Well, thank you so much, Mike and Empie, for the presentation. It was quite insightful. Let me just see if there are any questions. Seems like there aren't any questions, but I suppose I could ask one from my side. I know, Mike, in the beginning, you did speak about how implementing new software can often bring on new roles and responsibilities. But what I've seen is that there's a lot of resistance to technology because a lot of people fear the loss of jobs, rather the change of roles and responsibilities. So how do we address that in successfully implementing new software or technologies?
Yeah, there is a fear of the loss of jobs, but experience around the world is showing that we are creating different kinds of jobs. I'm pleased to see, if you keep up with the mining news and various mining companies who are undergoing digital transformation exercises are already coming to grips with this whole business of reskilling of the people that they have employed. And yes, some jobs will fall away, exactly as has happened throughout history whenever new technology arises. Some people will find opportunity in that and some won't, unfortunately. Certainly from my perspective, there's more opportunity to be had.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Are there any questions? Is anyone going to post a question? Well, if not, well, I'd just like to thank you both, Mike and Empie, for that presentation. Seems like there are no questions, but I believe this webinar will be recorded and posted.
Okay, that's fine. Happy to take questions if anybody has any later.
Well, there's just one question that's just come in.
Yep.
So let me just read that out to you both. Question from the metallurgical corner. What is the status out there regarding commodity accounting within the plants and across the complete value chain? Are there software packages that are used, or is it just a case of single point spreadsheets?
I'd like to answer that one first. I can tell you that Excel is the world's most popular mine technical application. We find it everywhere we go. I don't knock it too much because those spreadsheets have locked away inside them a vast amount of knowledge about the business. The risk is that only one person knows how to drive the spreadsheets. In the metallurgical area, there are many applications that get used. A lot of them, if we talk about pure technology things, things like a manufacturing execution systems, SCADAs, PLCs, and so on. But there are others that regard the way the software is built, it regards the mining business as a series of stockpiles. And that kind of approach has led to a couple of different pieces of software in that environment. And not only within the metallurgy, but from metallurgy through to the person buying the product.
I can maybe also just add to that we find there's a lot of progress in the handover between the mining cycle and the processing cycle, where the things like grade, like continuous or much more active grade control and replanning based on short-term changes in quality requirements is becoming possible now. And we see that because we're able to use the inputs from the plant as parameters into a parametric planning cycle. That parametric planning cycle may not give us the ability to, or may of course not change big things like the mine design and how we excavate, but it will change, or it might change if there is the flexibility to do so. Where we go, what kind of grade we are chasing at a specific given time in the kinds of mining operations that can facilitate that kind of flexibility. George, I see you posted there at the same time. We're not beholden to spreadsheets that have become too big to fail. Resistance to change follows. Yeah, I think that's a comment that speaks for itself.
Yeah, if that's how you feel, you're either genuinely in a corner and at serious risk when the person who understands the spreadsheet retires or passes on, and there are alternatives to be had.
Absolutely. And one of the probably biggest pieces of advice that I can give you here is, it is extremely unlikely that you're going to have one company that solves this problem for you. There is a much higher probability of success if you bring together experts from a few companies and create an ecosystem and make your vendors at the mine aware that they should be acting as an ecosystem to work together to solve your problem. Because if you don't, they are each going to go just for the unique thing that makes them the most money with the least amount of effort. And it's important for you to actually orchestrate the relationships between the vendors in order to solve complex multidisciplinary issues such as this one. It might be less of a technical issue and more of a business issue.
I'd like to add to that on the multidisciplinary angle. Just because it's metallurgy doesn't mean that all the information is metallurgical. I will pretty much guarantee you are, if you're just using spreadsheets, you are inputting mining information at one end and you're inputting supply chain information at another end. These things are not single disciplinary issues, and the ecosystem that Empie referred to are people who have different views at different parts of the value chain. Bring them together on your behalf.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you very much. I think those are all the questions.
Okay, I just got then for the people who attended, thank you very much. And Ian Saker, say hello to your dad. We worked together in 1978.
Thank you very much, everyone. It was a pleasure to join you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar.
Okay, and seriously, if anybody has any further questions, we're happy to entertain them. Okay, cheers, thank you, bye.
There's a response from Ian for you.
Oh, okay. All right, thanks, Ian.